El Salvador, a country known for its beautiful landscapes, vibrant culture, and resilient people. But beneath the surface, there lies a harsh reality that many are forced to endure every single day. A small country facing big problems. The streets are crowded and the urban areas are filled with people struggling to make ends meet. Poverty, violence, and lack of opportunities plague the nation, making daily life a constant battle for survival. And in the middle of all this, something terrible is happening to many women. They are caught in a cycle of despair, unable to escape the harsh conditions that surround them. Their cries for help often go unheard, and their suffering continues in silence. They can't make choices about their own bodies, and they're struggling just to survive. The lack of reproductive rights and access to healthcare leaves them vulnerable and powerless. Women are forced to carry pregnancies to term, even in cases of rape or when their lives are at risk. No one hears their stories. Their voices are drowned out by the noise of a society that refuses to acknowledge their pain. They are often ignored, dismissed, and left to fend for themselves in a world that seems indifferent to their plight. This isn't just a problem in El Salvador, it's a problem everywhere. Women around the world face similar struggles, fighting for their rights and their dignity. The battle for gender equality is a global issue, and it requires a collective effort to bring about change. It's a fight against old-fashioned ideas, unfair laws, and a system that doesn't value women. The legal and social structures in place often work against women, perpetuating inequality and injustice. These outdated beliefs and practices must be challenged and reformed. Imagine a sea turtle caught in a fishing net, struggling to breathe, wanting to be free. This image captures the essence of what many women in El Salvador experience daily. They are trapped, suffocating under the weight of oppressive laws and societal expectations. That's what it's like for many women in El Salvador. They reach out for help, but their pleas are often met with indifference or hostility. The hopelessness in their eyes tells a story of a life constrained by limitations and fear. Just like people help those turtles, we need to speak up for these women. Advocacy and support can make a difference. By raising our voices and taking action, we can help break the chains that bind them and offer a glimmer of hope for a better future. Their stories are sad and make us angry. The emotions they evoke are powerful, driving us to seek justice and change. These women deserve to be heard, and their experiences should fuel our determination to fight for their rights. We'll hear about Beatrice and Maria Teresa Rivera. Their stories are emblematic of the struggles faced by many women in El Salvador. They highlight the urgent need for reform and the importance of standing in solidarity with those who are oppressed. What happened to them shows how bad things are because of El Salvador's strict abortion laws. These laws not only violate women's rights but also endanger their lives. The cases of Beatrice and Maria Teresa Rivera serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of such draconian measures. The laws in El Salvador should protect people, but they're hurting women. The abortion laws are some of the strictest in the world. Instead of keeping women healthy, these laws make them criminals for making choices about their own bodies. They live in fear, never knowing what will happen next. Because they can't get safe abortions, women's lives are in danger. They have to find secret and unsafe ways which can make them very sick. And it gets worse. Even women who have miscarriages can get in trouble. People think they did something wrong, and they can go to jail. It's a terrible thing to lose a baby, and then to be punished for it too. Beatrice was already sick with lupus. Lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease that can cause inflammation and pain in any part of your body. For Beatrice, it meant frequent hospital visits, a strict medication regimen, and constant monitoring of her health. Despite her illness, she tried to live a normal life, but the disease took a toll on her physical and emotional well-being. Then she got pregnant, and the baby had a serious problem called anencephaly. Anencephaly is a severe birth defect in which a baby is born without parts of the brain and skull. This condition is always fatal, and babies with anencephaly usually die shortly after birth. The news was devastating for Beatrice and her family. They were faced with an unimaginable situation. This means the baby's brain and skull wouldn't develop fully, and it couldn't survive. The doctors explained that carrying the pregnancy to term would put Beatrice's life at significant risk due to her lupus. The medical team recommended an abortion to save her life, but in El Salvador, where Beatrice lived, abortion was illegal under all circumstances. Beatrice had a terrible choice. Continue the pregnancy and risk her own life, or have an abortion and go to jail. The legal system in El Salvador was unforgiving, and women who sought abortions faced severe penalties, including long prison sentences. Beatrice and her family sought legal advice and appealed to the government for an exception, given her dire medical condition. She asked for help, but the government said no. The authorities denied her request, citing the country's strict anti-abortion laws. This decision left Beatrice in a state of despair. She felt abandoned by the very system that was supposed to protect her. Her health continued to deteriorate as the pregnancy progressed. Beatrice had to carry the baby, even though it couldn't live. Each day was a struggle, both physically and emotionally. The pain and suffering were unbearable, but she had no choice but to endure it. Her family watched helplessly as her condition worsened, knowing that the outcome was inevitable. The baby died soon after it was born. The brief life of the baby was marked by sorrow and grief. Beatrice and her family held a small funeral, mourning the loss of a life that never had a chance. The emotional toll on Beatrice was immense, and her health continued to decline. Everyone around the world was shocked. The case of Beatrice garnered international attention, highlighting the harsh realities of El Salvador's abortion laws. Human rights organizations, activists, and concerned citizens around the globe rallied in support of Beatrice, calling for changes to the country's draconian policies. This showed everyone how bad the abortion laws were. The public outcry was immense, and protests erupted both in El Salvador and internationally. People demanded justice for Beatrice and called for the protection of women's rights. The case became a symbol of the fight against oppressive laws that endangered women's lives. A court said El Salvador was wrong and had to pay Beatrice. In a landmark ruling, an international court found that El Salvador had violated Beatrice's human rights. The court ordered the government to compensate her and to take steps to prevent similar cases in the future. It was a significant victory for women's rights advocates, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Beatrice's health had been irreparably harmed by the ordeal, and the emotional scars were deep. The compensation and the court's ruling could not undo the suffering she had endured. Beatrice died in 2017 from a later accident. Her life was cut short, not just by the accident, but by the years of suffering and neglect she had faced. Her story remains a poignant reminder of the consequences of restrictive laws and the importance of fighting for human rights. Her life was too short because of what happened. Beatrice's legacy lives on as a symbol of resilience and the ongoing struggle for justice. Her story continues to inspire those who fight for the rights of women and the protection of their health and well-being. Since 1998, abortion has been completely illegal in El Salvador. This blanket ban means that under no circumstances can a woman legally terminate her pregnancy. The law is one of the strictest in the world, reflecting a deeply conservative stance on reproductive rights. No matter what, even if the woman was raped, the law does not make any exceptions. This has led to countless women being forced to carry pregnancies resulting from sexual violence. The trauma of rape is compounded by the trauma of being denied a choice, or the baby is sick, with conditions that are incompatible with life. Women are forced to carry to term, knowing their baby will not survive. This causes immense emotional and psychological pain. Or the woman's life is in danger, abortion is not allowed. This puts women in life-threatening situations where their health and lives are at risk. Medical professionals are often powerless to intervene. Women can go to jail for up to 8 years. The legal system treats them as criminals, punishing them for seeking control over their own bodies. This harsh punishment extends to those who assist them as well. Sometimes it's even worse, up to 50 years. Women have been convicted of aggravated homicide for having miscarriages or stillbirths, accused of inducing abortion. The sentences are draconian and disproportionate. This shows how little the system cares about women. The laws are not just restrictive, they are punitive and dehumanizing. They reflect a society that prioritizes control over compassion. These laws scare women and keep them quiet. Fear of legal repercussions silences them, preventing them from seeking help or speaking out about their experiences. The stigma is overwhelming. Doctors are afraid to help, fearing legal consequences. They risk losing their licenses, facing imprisonment, or being ostracized by their communities. This creates a chilling effect on the medical profession, even if a woman might die. The fear of prosecution overrides the duty to save lives. This is a dire situation where medical ethics are compromised by legal constraints. This is very dangerous for women. The lack of safe and legal options forces them into desperate situations. They are left with no choice but to seek unsafe methods. They have to find secret and unsafe ways to have abortions. These clandestine procedures are often performed in unsanitary conditions by unqualified individuals, leading to severe health complications or death. The abortion laws in El Salvador aren't just about laws, they represent a systemic failure to protect women's health and rights. They perpetuate a cycle of fear, silence, and suffering. They're about life and death. The consequences of these laws are real and devastating. Women lose their lives, families are torn apart, and communities are left to mourn. They're about real women like Beatrice, whose tragic story highlights the human cost of these draconian laws. Beatrice was denied an abortion despite her life-threatening condition, leading to her untimely death, whose lives were ruined by a system that doesn't care. The fight for reproductive rights in El Salvador is a fight for justice, dignity, and the right to life itself. It is a call to recognize and respect the humanity of women. Maria Teresa Rivera's story is really sad. In 2011 she had a miscarriage. This is a very sad thing for any mother. But then, she was arrested. They said she caused the miscarriage on purpose. Even though she said she didn't do anything wrong, and there was no proof, they put her in jail for 40 years. Her boss said something that wasn't true about when she was pregnant. Even though this was wrong, they still sent her to jail. Groups like Amnesty International fought for her. After 4 years, a judge let her go because there wasn't enough proof. But those 4 years were terrible for her. This shows how much El Salvador needs to change its laws. Things have gotten a little better recently. Maria Teresa Rivera finally got out of jail. People all over the world were upset about what happened to Beatrice, and that made El Salvador think about changing its laws. But it's not enough. Many people still have old-fashioned ideas, and some religious groups don't want the laws to change. The fight isn't over, but these small wins show that change is possible. We need to keep talking about Beatrice and Maria Teresa so people know what's happening. This is about everyone, not just women. We all need to help. What's happening in El Salvador shows us that we still need to fight for women's rights everywhere. We all need to help the women in El Salvador. Here's what you can do. Tell other people about this. Share it online and talk about it with your friends and family. When more people know what's happening, it will be harder for El Salvador to ignore the problem. You can also help groups like Amnesty International. They help women in El Salvador with lawyers and doctors, and you can talk to your government leaders. Tell them to speak up about the bad laws in El Salvador and help change them. What's happening to women in El Salvador is important for everyone. When we support them, we're fighting for equality and the right to make choices about our own bodies. We need to listen to them and share their stories. We can't ignore what's happening. We need to help them fight for what's right. Together, we can make things better. There are many bad things happening in the world, but we need to talk about them and help people who need it. The women of El Salvador need our help. We need to be strong and keep fighting for a world where every woman can make her own choices.